know in the olden days, a lot of people looked at ag as they just kind of, rape and pillage the land. They had no regard for the soils and the erosion, and we'd throw chemicals out there and just all that kind of stuff. That the real ugly side of agriculture. In my experience, it couldn't be further from the truth.
Welcome to Shaping the Basin. I am here with Scott White. Scott and I have known each other for a long time. You are the general manager of Klamath Drainage District. You've coached softball. I know you've been with the Klamath Water Users Association, but why don't you tell us what you would want us to know about what you do now?
Oh, well, you started to talk a little bit about my history. It's pretty lengthy, if you will, at least in the Klamath Basin. So I moved here about 15 years ago. Took a lateral transfer with the Oregon Water Resources Department to become the water master here. And I had the unfortunate privilege, if you will, of regulating water for the first time in history in the Klamath Basin. And it was horrible. We had a drought year. You're telling people to shut their water off who are trying to make a living on water. It is not a fun job. I don't wish it on anybody, but that was my first job in the Klamath Basin. But I've been working in water for years, almost my entire career. From there, like you mentioned, I went to the Klamath Water Users Association, and then now I'm with the Klamath Drainage District, still working in water, managing the district, and trying to identify some security for our growers down there, and trying to make sure that their grandkids get to keep farming in the future.
Mm-hmm. Did you, what got you into water to begin with? Is that something you dreamed of doing when you were a little kid?
Well, to be honest, it was kind of by accident. I did go to school for environmental science. I never in a million years thought anything about water rights, other than what I, may have studied in school or anything like that. But didn't think anything about water rights or anything along those lines, natural resource wise. Out of the blue, I was working for the city of Albany in wastewater, actually, and I got a phone call, I believe it was, from OWRD that asked if I was interested in working for him, just out of nowhere. And and that was out in Pendleton. I told my wife at the time that I'd love to just go interview and see, it's a free trip to Pendleton. Let's go. And sure enough, that was really where my career started with Water Resources Department, was in Pendleton. And from there, I was working in groundwater out there. And then I was water master on the Lower John Day in a little tiny town called Condon, Oregon. And then moved down here to Klamath Falls. So it was really by accident. I'm not quite sure how my name got out there, but nonetheless, they contacted me, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you lived in Klamath?
It's been about 15 years now.
Okay. I'm always curious how long it took you to love it here. Were you instantly in love with Klamath Falls, or did it take a little bit?
Well, I probably have two different answers to that. I mean, I'm an outdoorsy guy. I mean, I love the outdoors. I love the fact that, within 5 minutes I can be, outdoors and, hiking, if you will, or hunting or fishing. The natural beauty here is just, and I don't think anybody could ever argue this, is just stunning. So I think immediately you fall in love with that. Klamath Falls, the town, though, it's one thing. I grew up in the Seattle area, moved to Eugene, and then coming to a place and actually living in a place like Klamath Falls. It's a little bit of a culture shock, but I would say probably 18, 2 years maybe. The small town feel really started to grow on me. I started really appreciating, Main Street in particular. We do have a very special Main Street, really. And I compare it to other towns that I go to now. And just I'm like, ours kicks their Main Street's butt, that kind of stuff. And so the small town feel, or the rural feel, if you will, is really growing on me a lot. I still have a bit of a difficult time with how small the town is. Everybody knows everybody. So, or one way or another, but But yeah, I would say maybe 2 years, probably on the high end.
Speaking of Main Street and what you do with ag, we used to sit in some meetings every year and talk about the water issues and how it affects the entire community. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between like downtown and the ag community and businesses
Yeah,
overall?
that's a great question, and I don't think it gets talked about enough, to be honest. But the water, when we put water on the land, that helps grow stuff. And there's people that actually do that for a living. And when they do that stuff for a living, they're actually generating some revenue to which they pay taxes on, or they take that revenue and they turn around and they go spend that money in town, whether it's in our restaurants or for goods or even services, things like that. Well, those goods and services and restaurants are primarily downtown, and so we actually have our growers who are outside of town, who are coming to town and spending that money that they make. And so I mean, the trickle down effect, if you will, is a very real thing, and it's very, very noticeable, especially when we have drought years. Our local businesses really suffer as a result of that, because there's people not coming to town and spending the money.
Mhm.
So, not to mention, the growers out there, they employ a handful of workers. Those workers are making money. Those workers are coming to town, taking their families to dinner, buying goods and services, groceries, gas, all that kind of stuff as well. So, um, I think that stuff is really, really felt in rural America, is when we have droughts or we have natural resource issues that are really impacting our growers. Um, it's felt not just in their pocketbook, but everybody's pocketbook.
Mhm. Absolutely. In the last 15 years, have you seen any changes in the approach to water from the jobs that you've done and how that's
I
handled?
would say lots of different approaches, from putting on the boxing gloves, going toe to toe and trying to fight, to, fighting in the courtroom, to trying to, extend an olive branch. How can we work together? You go back to 2001, that really prompted kind of the fighting era, if you will. And then there was, not too long after that, there were conversations about, we got to stop suing each other. How can we figure this out? And so there was an attempt to come to terms with all the different basin stakeholders, if you will, and how we could all figure out how to share the resource. That fell through. We kind of went back into a litigation mode, which we're still in, I would say, um, and trying to figure all that out. Obviously, politics plays a big role, and that pendulum is always swinging. So how stakeholders are trying to take advantage or game the politics of it to gain a long term competitive advantage is, I think, a strategy that probably will never go away. From my perspective, though, I look at it more of like, we're neighbors. We got to figure out how to be neighbors. How can we figure out a way to get along, to where we go to the fence. We're not trying to we're not wanting to avoid each other at the fence, but we're looking for reasons to go to the fence and talk to each other, and get along, and maybe share a beer with each other at the fence. But um this basin's big, it's vast, it's limited, but people have been here forever, and have found a way to make it work. And why we're struggling is really, it's beyond me. And I get it. I'm an outsider. I've only been here 15 years, but I don't know if I've ever been anywhere where it's this difficult. And granted, it's very, very complicated, with tremendous history that I don't, for the life of me, will ever begin to understand. And but that being said, I think from a political perspective, you try to just stay the course. We're trying to work with all parties to figure out what we can do on our end. And I think I think that's probably the most sustainable, at least for my district's perspective. I think that's probably a smart way to go, and a safe way to go, and hopefully it's a successful way to go.
Yeah. Uh, we've focused a lot on like leadership traits. You just talked about like meeting at the fence and we're all neighbors. What are some of the things that you're doing? Are there specific projects you're doing in that regard? Or I think you've been doing some tours, maybe.
Yeah, we do. Well, gosh, I just did a tour yesterday. A real brief one. I had Henley High School out last week. Showed them some stuff. But we do probably. I mean, it might be 10 tours a year, small groups to large groups. We put on a big one called the Renaissance Tour that is actually a collaborative between us and many others that have interest down in Lower Lake as well. Um, but the stuff we're doing specifically, I would say it was about 3 4 years ago. We really shifted in kind of our approach to branding as a district, and I think really what opened our eyes was the fact that we were in a drought. We looked at the refuge. The refuges were starting to dry up, not completely dry yet, but we were seeing an impact that it was having on the Pacific Flyway, especially locally. Um, and so in doing so, I think it was the following year where we actually dried up our refuges. We started talking as a board about our geographic location. Many of our landowners and our board members are multi-generational farmers down there. They grew up down there, and they were the ones that really started highlighting the fact that there's something different. There's something off. We're not hearing the birds. It's quiet out here, and that's not a good thing. And so we looked at that and identified that we have an opportunity here, potential opportunity to try and play a role in not only the Pacific Flyway, but also potentially fish. Let's start looking at this from an ecosystem perspective rather than just a ag versus whatever, ag first type of approach. So we really shifted our branding to like, how can we integrate with all of that? And geographically, as you know, we sit right next to the Lower Klamath National Wildlife Refuge, which is really I mean, there's some good, there's some bad there. There's private property issues that I don't think you would ever get away. People wanting to drive out on private property to look at birds or to do that kind of stuff, and those are just issues that you have to handle as a result of being right next to a refuge. But in the same breath, we have an opportunity, and that opportunity being we have year-round water rights, whereas the refuge may be limited on having access to water. So can we host, if you will, these birds when the refuges can't? And so that year one, when the refuges were dry, we flooded up as many acres that would take water, because we had access to it, where the refuges didn't. And getting into those details is really, really complicated, why the refuge didn't, and I'd hate to bore you with that, but nonetheless, the refuges didn't have water. We had access to water, and we were like, we are going to flood up as much as we can. We are going to invite people out as a result. This was the year Winter Wings got canceled. We're going to invite people out, and we're going to show them the reason why water needs to be on the landscape. We had a tremendous opportunity to highlight that. And and also why agriculture plays a key role in the Pacific Flyway, especially right here in the Klamath Basin. And so we did that, and really it kind of there was a new brand that was born, and I tend to kind of lean towards, this is like the new way of sustainable farming, how we can integrate with fish and wildlife and refuges in this case. And so we're trying to find what that balance looks like right now. Fortunately, we've got a tremendous water year. Refuges are flooding back up. There's birds everywhere. It's a really nice. It's a welcome reprieve, if you will. Um, but yeah, that's really the direction we're going in. We're looking at some restoration projects. What it might look like to connect the 80 canal permanently. So our 80 canal is one of our delivery canals for irrigation. The point of diversion is right on the Klamath River. We're looking to see what it would look like if we were to open that up and never close it. In other words, connect the refuge back to the river, very similar to how it used to function. So having that water out on the refuge permanently What opportunities does that create? What benefits is that from a fish and wildlife perspective? I think a lot of those are pretty obvious, but some of the things we're also seeing is that having water out on that landscape, the refuge that is that the groundwater recharge and the spring activity that is occurring in the Klamath River Canyon, which is cold, clean water for fish that are needing to come up the river, especially now that dams are out. Um, and so, looking at all of that kind of stuff, we're seeing some pretty interesting science behind that, ecological science that's really showing, why the system worked the way it did originally. And so, like, where we can figure out how to put it back the way it used to function, the way it used to work, where we can still live and we can still farm, and my growers can raise families out there, then why wouldn't we look at those opportunities? So we're looking at that kind of stuff, and we're very much in the infancy of looking at that. We're working on feasibility for that right now. We're hoping to have, possibly a feasibility study by the end of this year. Um, but some exciting stuff there.
If a picture says 1,000 words, imagine the story. 24 frames a second. Can tell about your business. 40 Deuce Films.
What do you think is the future of water and ag in our community? You think it's going to continue to be strong? What do you think? Where are we headed?
Well, I think it's a part of our identity at this point, and I think being that it is part of our identity, I do get really nervous that if there's obviously the big fear that if ag goes away, then what? And there's the conspiracy theorists, which I love a good conspiracy theory as much as everybody, but but the theory that the United States doesn't want ag in the Klamath Basin, they're trying to get rid of ag, even though they promised it to them, years ago. Well, if that happens, what does that mean for our identity and as a community? And so I do think about that kind of stuff. I do tend to worry about that kind of stuff. Agriculture is a big, big part of our community, just as the fish are, just as the birds are. And so how can we again integrate, adjust, given the state of our natural resources now and how they're managed? I don't quite know the answer to that, but I know that there's a lot of people working on exploring that and trying to find what that balance may look like. I don't see ag ever going away completely. I really don't. It's too much of our identity. Um, is there enough water to sustain ag? Absolutely. But I think we're going to have to find some sort of balance to fit within the current regulations until we can solve some of these bigger problems.
Mhm. Um, on every one of these podcasts, I learned stuff that I didn't know. And sometimes I think I know a lot, and sometimes I don't know anything at all. But what is something that people would be surprised to know about the ag community or the ag industry?
Well, I think it's becoming a little bit more understanding. I think more people are starting to understand it, I guess is the right way to say that. But one thing I know, in the olden days, a lot of people looked at ag as just, they just kind of, rape and pillage the land. They had no regard for the soils and the erosion, and we'd throw chemicals out there and just all that kind of stuff, that the real ugly side of agriculture, when in my experience, it couldn't be further from the truth. The fact of the matter is our growers, they're investors, and they are not going to do anything to jeopardize their investment. And so in this case, they're investing in the soil. And so to to number one, to over fertilize, that's number one, a waste of money. It's not healthy for your soils that are actually your lifeblood in terms of generating revenue for your business. And so I've actually found that the growers are probably bigger stewards of the land than the people who claim that they're stewards of the land. And so So I think that's something that, like I said, I think there's starting to be more of an understanding about that, especially as there's more of an organic market and things like that. And there's, I know sustainable ag is a real kind of clicky thing to say now. And so, but what that's doing is that's really highlighting the fact that, these folks are stewards of the land. They're doing the right thing by the land. And I think just like any industry, there's good growers and there's bad growers. But even the bad growers, I don't think they're out there trying to shoot themselves in the foot, so to speak, just because, I think it's them learning, and trying to figure this stuff out. It's an industry just like any other. And but at the end of the day, there's a model, and the model certainly isn't to destroy the thing that gives back to you. It's not that.
Right. I think along those lines, one of the things I was surprised to learn early on when I was just barely learning about it was the amount of restoration projects that are done by the ag community. Do you have a feeling for, are they doing the majority of the restoration projects? What would you say about that?
Well, I don't think you can do restoration without private land. And so yeah, I think private land is really that's where we're going to solve our problems. And so you go, and if you were to look, and I mean, a real fun term to say is random acts of conservation, right? Well, those random acts of conservation are done by, organizations that are pushing for these conservation works, but they're working with private landowners. And so, yeah, those private landowners they see the value in conservation. They see the value in stewardship and efficiency. And, they're doing those projects because they believe in those projects and they think that they can work. And so I think yes, absolutely. There is there is an effort, there is a will, there is a desire by private landowners to do the restoration conservation work. One of my landowners, he says, those fish have my water, I want it back. So we're going to do what we need to do to get that water back. And what he means by that is we're going to do what we can to help recover fish, to do the right thing by the fish, that are endangered in this case, and threatened in another. But that to me, I think I think that just spells it out perfectly. That there is an understanding within the ag community that we got to start doing the right thing by these species. Otherwise, our future might be in jeopardy.
Sure. We've talked about the future of ag and kind of what that means for the community. I'm going to switch gears away from water for just a minute because you do a lot to give back to the youth. You've done some coaching, I think primarily softball, but maybe baseball. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. What makes you so passionate about coaching?
Well, I played baseball, and I played baseball in college, and, I've had some tremendous coaches. And so I kind of look at it like this is my way of giving back. Obviously, it's a good way for me to be around my kids as they're coming up also. So, but I started coaching year one after I got done playing college ball. I went back and I coached at my alma mater, Sheldon High School. That was my first year of getting back into coaching. Or I shouldn't say getting into coaching. And I've been coaching ever since, whether it be from a team perspective or even doing like lessons, private stuff. And so, and I still do a lot of that stuff for baseball. I am coaching softball right now. I coach softball at Henley High School, and my daughter plays, so it's a great way for me to be around her, which I appreciate. Her friends, which they're incredible young ladies. But yeah, I've coached. I've coached Little League. I coached baseball at Henley. I coached baseball at Mazama. Now coaching softball at Henley. I coached at my high school, Sheldon. I did work when I was living up in Condon. I worked with Hepner's baseball team, who ended up going to the championship that year. So that was exciting, especially working in those small towns like that, where the kids, they really just don't have the kind of access to facilities and things like that you'd get in like the Portland, Eugene areas. But so I really enjoyed that season. That was a fun season. But yeah, I've been coaching for a very, very long time. Travel ball, You name it.
So one of the things I hear is that it's been getting increasingly harder to get more parents and adults involved in coaching, refing, and those kind of things. And I would argue that you're a really busy person in your career, but you make time for that. What might you say to people who are on the fence about stepping up and getting helping?
Well, first and foremost, I will say if you're doing it, God bless you, because you're exactly right. Finding reps, finding umpires, finding coaches, especially good coaches, is it's getting harder and harder. I mean, our lives are getting busier. We're able to work nonstop anymore with our mobile phones. We just have access to work 24/7. And so as a result, a lot of our bosses expect that. Or if you're running a business, that's your competitive advantage, is to always be working one step ahead of your competition. So, but that being said, for those that do find the time, or are thinking about trying to find the time, I would say please do it. It is so important for these kids, to have, especially people that understand the sport, especially people that understand that youth that grow up in sports end up being good leaders in the future. They contribute more to society than kids who are not involved in sports. I mean, that's just a statistical fact. Um, and so even though I like to say, yes, I'm giving back, because so much was given to me as a young athlete, but really I'm doing it selfishly because I know these kids are going to take care of me someday, right? And so I want to make sure they're growing up and getting out into the world and being strong. And in the case right now, strong women who are leaders, that are productive members of society and contributing in a very, very positive way to their communities. And so, if they're thinking about it, my strong recommendation is just do it. Just do it. You won't regret it. I don't know any coaches that have actually just said, I regret doing that. It is a lot of work. In some cases there is a financial commitment. Like, you got to buy balls, you got to buy equipment, you got to, obviously you're putting gas in your car to get from point A to point B, and you're getting hotels and things like that if you're traveling. But yeah, it is so worth it.
I love that. We talked to Millie, the new director at Discover Klamath,
Hmm.
a couple of weeks ago, and um, there's a lot of focus on sports tourism for our community. And I valued sports in my son's lives. But I think that's such a great opportunity for Klamath as well. We have some fantastic facilities.
We do. We have incredible facilities. We got Steen Sports Park up on the hill. That they just hosted a big tournament this weekend, and I think they've got a handful of tournaments coming up this summer. And so yeah, just great opportunities, and great facilities. I know in the Klamath Basin too. I do see a future potentially for track and field, on a large scale, just because of our elevation. I see opportunities for training, for events, things like that. Klamath Basin, when it gets hot in other areas, we tend to not be as hot, which I think it should be an appeal for people to want to come play here. Um, so yeah, and we're not in that bad of a location. We're right on Highway 97. I know Medford's really, really ramped up on their sports stuff over there, but Medford's hot. It's really hot over there in the middle of summer. And so I would say all you teams that are thinking about getting away from the heat, come on over here. It's cooler over here when it's 100 degrees over there. So but I think you're right, and I wish Millie the best in trying to really ramp that up, because there is tremendous opportunity here.
Yeah, great. Thank you for your time. I always wrap up with 3 fun questions at the end. So I'm going to do those and then we'll be done. But
Okay.
what is one small change somebody could do to make a difference in their community?
Coach, ref, umpire.
Easy as that. If you could put a billboard up somewhere in the community, what would it say?
Kids matter.
Mm, I like it. And if I handed you $250,000 to do something with by the end of the day to make a difference, what would you do?
I would probably turf an infield at some sort of baseball or softball facility so we could play in the rain.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time today, Scott.
Absolutely,
I
Heather. It was
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.